I've made a lot of videos about oil pastels, and I feel like my favorite video is this one, just because it's a very concise, short video telling you everything there is to know about oil pastels. I'm gonna link it at the end of this one if you're curious and you want to watch it. But today I want to talk about the pros and cons of oil pastels. Starting with the pros, I feel like oil pastels are the cheapest, most inexpensive art supplies out there. Even colored pencils I feel like are a little bit more expensive, or at least comparable. The fact that you could get a pretty nice set for about $5 is amazing. The colors are super vibrant and you can blend them together to create new shades, and you don't need a bunch of different tools in order to get started. Just a minimal set. This one is pretty good, by the way, the Junior Artist by Craypass. Inexpensive, works really well, but there are other ones obviously. And like a mixed media paper, you're set. The biggest pro in my opinion is that it's cheap and super accessible for anyone. Second pro is that it's very portable, so you can bring it with you if you want to plein air paint or draw. If you go on vacation or anywhere, you can have a minimal set with just a sketchbook and a small set like this. And there's no setting up, you don't need any water, you don't need a lot of tools like I was mentioning. You can also make yourself a little traveling kit with like a plastic container with a very minimal setup. And it's really fun that you don't need a lot of material in order to create. And the last pro, for me, it's a pro, but it could also be a con depending on your opinion, is that oil pastel has a very unique look. You can either love it or hate it. It's not quite like paint, but it's not very blendy like other drawing materials. So it's really the middle ground to me between drawing and painting. It could kind of feel like both. Oil pastels have really nice pros, but they have really frustrating cons. And I think it's important to talk about those just to help beginner artists know about it in advance, to kind of know what you're getting into. If you like work that is more realistic, more figurative, and more detailed, oil pastels might get really frustrating for you because it's hard to get very detailed with it. It's possible if you work in larger formats because of the scale, but if you work in like a normal 9x12, the stick itself is kind of chunky and it's really hard to get details in. Some people can, but I feel like this is not the art supply to do intricate, realistic works. If you like spontaneous and very expressive artworks, you might really fall in love with it, but for detailed work, I don't really recommend it. Another con is that although oil pastels are very portable, you don't need a lot of material and a lot of setup time, they're still pretty messy. A lot of crummies goes everywhere. It's pretty easy to dirty your clothes, and your fingers get very, very sticky and full of oil pastels. At least I do. I don't know if I'm a very messy painter, but I feel like they're messy. It gets under your fingernails, so a way around that is to wear gloves, obviously. But I think overall they're pretty messy if you compare it to colored pencil, for instance, or even watercolor paints. Although you need water and maybe a little bit more setup, it's a lot less messy in my opinion. The cleanup is a lot easier. And for me, the biggest con about oil pastel is the preservation process. How to get my beautiful painting or drawing that I did to stay in a pristine state for a really long time. Ooh, I've been on a quest to find a way to varnish oil pastels. I've tried sprays specifically made for oil pastels. I've tried different mediums to kind of put a varnish over it to really protect it against scratches, against dust. None of it is foolproof. The sprays will give a small layer of protection, but it's very mild. It's still very easy to scratch the drawing. Same thing goes for mediums. I've tried matte medium, glossy mediums, all types of things, and it's always very scratchable, still movable, because oil pastels kind of harden with time, but they don't really dry like oil paint would dry. The only way that I really found to protect it foolproof and encase it is with resin. With resin, it really works. But resin is hard to work with. It's very nasty. It's toxic. You have to wear a mask. Be very careful because it's not good to breathe it in. It's also very expensive and it changes the look of your painting or drawing. It goes from being this like gritty, very textured piece of art to a super high gloss mirrored finish painting. So it's a question of personal taste. I personally love the glossy finish, like oil pastels and resin on top. I like it, but I don't like the process of having to work with resin. So I wouldn't do it with every piece of oil pastel that I create. I would do it for specific larger formats. And I'm very particular and very meticulous about storing my artwork. So I have portfolios and I'm very cautious about taking care of them, but even by doing that, I can see that some of my oil pastel drawings have a bunch of speckles and scratches just from being stored. It's almost unavoidable, especially when there's black on the piece of art. It goes everywhere. The little speckles and crummies, they kind of smear and becomes part of the drawing. To me, that's the biggest con, and it's very frustrating. Working super hard, like for hours on a piece of art, storing it to the best of your abilities and having it kind of messed up after a year is so frustrating. If I had all the resources in the world, obviously, I would frame every single piece of art that I create with oil pastels and store them in perfect conditions, but I don't have those resources now. I have to be realistic. So oil pastels are always kind of like, oh, there's pros, super cheap, very spontaneous, expressive, portable, unique looking, but the cons, having trouble with the details, having it be very messy because of the crummies, sticky fingers, and almost impossible to preserve. Some days I feel like the cons outweighs the pros, honestly, but I still like the medium just because it's so unique. Should you try it? Absolutely. It's only $5. Everybody should try it. It's a great way to learn. Here's the video I was talking about if you want to know everything about oil pastels in 5 minutes. And I'll see you in just a few days for another one. Thanks for watching.